Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you lovely folks joining me here nice and early over at Marvel's Snap Zone. Welcome back for our weekly tier list update. This is quite the week, and it's something you really do not want to miss. This is a record amount of changes to our Snap Zone tier list in the space of 1 week, all off the back of a brand new season pass for Warriors of Wakanda, and it's an expanding metagame as more and more people find themselves in pool number 3, experimenting with pool 3 cards, and kind of redefining everything we know about the Snap ladder. So everything going up, everything's going down. Well worth paying attention and checking this one out. So this week I will be breaking down every single deck of tier 3 or higher on this tier list, giving you deck lists for every single deck on this tier list in an article in the description down below, so you can go and grab those, try these decks out for yourself if you have the cards, just export them and put them straight into your client, as easy as that. As always, folks, if you haven't subscribed over on YouTube, please do. We're enjoying this journey so far, making Marvel Snap content for you. So if you are enjoying it, make sure you keep us here and me chained to my desk by turning on notifications, hitting that bell, and making sure you don't miss anything that we put out. So as always with this, screenshot for the tier list will be on screen for you in just a second. So if all you want is the screenshot of the tier list, you can grab a screenshot, grab it from the article. Job done, no problem. Otherwise, I will be time-stamping each and every one of these decks in the description box, so you can skip to decks you're interested in, see the list, or hear what I have to say about them after I've broken down the whole metagame for this week. As always, we do have some sources to thank for their data when it comes to making this tier list, so I just want to give a quick shout out to the following: MarvelSnapZone.pro, who are currently working with us to make our dedicated Marvel Snap tracker. If you want more information about that, keep your eyes peeled on the website. It's coming very, very soon. They've been great for data collection regarding the tier list. Snap.fan and their community Discord server, great for data mined information and win rates about cube averages and so on and so forth. Well worth checking out if you haven't done so already. Snap Decks over on Twitter, featuring some of the best deck lists and community submissions for people that have been making it to Infinite. Well worth checking them out if you haven't already. And MarvelSnap.io, the final website we want to give a shout out to as well, doing some good stuff over there. Last but not least, all of you lovely players and people out there taking the time to come and discuss with us how you feel about Snap, what you've been playing against, what you think the best cards are, and just offering your insight to us to inform this tier list as well. Any feedback is very much appreciated, and you're always welcome to tag us at Marvel Snap Zone, or come and have a chat in the community Discord if you want to offer your opinion or let us know what you think was wrong about this week's tier list. So, with that all said and done, let us take a look at this absolute monstrous amount of changes on this week's Marvel Snap tier list. I wasn't kidding, look at that. In the entirety of tier number 3 upwards, a single deck has remained where it was before, otherwise everything is going up, down, or arguably brand new archetypes to the game. All really, really exciting stuff. You may notice tier 1 this week comprises of 5 decks. A huge change of pace from where we were just a few weeks ago. And of course, just more decks and more information than ever out there. So, to tier 1 this week, Baero remains kind of a kingpin of the format, remains firmly in tier number 1, arguably is the best deck in the game. Dracula Lockjaw this week finding itself up there with Baero. Wants an unproven archetype, the test version of Discard, if you will, kind of showing that it has everything it needs to compete in the current metagame and more. Ongoing Destroyer, a revisited and revitalized version of the Destroyer archetype, has been making waves on the ladder all of this week and shows itself to be an absolute kingpin of the game as well. Wong Reveal gaining a huge bonus from the release of Black Panther, kind of redefining that archetype and giving it a fresh breath of life. Up into tier 1 it goes as well. And Sera Miracle hanging on by the skin of its teeth as a tier 1 option in this format, but definitely making its way down, as you can see with the arrow. No longer the best deck in the game, if you like. Now just one of many tier 1 choices, thanks to the evolutions of the week. Tier number 2, Kazoo, making a strong case for being the single best budget deck that Marvel Snap has to offer, raising itself back up tier 2 this week. Control, traditional Control, finding itself in tier 2. A lot of those anti-meta choices stronger than ever because of how dominant some of these tier 1 strategies have been. Deathpool making its way down slightly, looking a little inferior in terms of being a destroy deck in comparison to Baero, but still a very strong choice if that is a mechanic you enjoy, or if you're just a fan of Deathpool in particular. Patriot this week, kind of floating around where it was before, maybe arguably a little bit down, kind of just having a bit of a vanilla week. People exploring new decks, trying new archetypes, and Patriot, for the most part, unevolved, leaves it a well-established archetype, definitely worth playing, but nothing too exciting to report on the Patriot front this week, I don't believe. Negative Serotonin, once again, kind of still floating in Tier 2, but more towards the bottom this week, having a resurgence overall with those powerful play patterns, but not quite hanging with the rest of Tier 2, truth be told. If you're looking for a budget version of that deck, we actually featured it on the channel just a few days ago, so well worth checking out. Tier 3 this week, Locking Locations, the Location archetype, lovingly named by Den, making an appearance this week, showing you how you can shut down various spots and stop your opponent playing the game they want to be playing. Movement, making its way up, putting on a pretty good show this week thanks to featured locations and a little bit of revitalized gameplay from several content creators, so well worth checking out that one. Zero Destroy, unfortunately finding itself at the bottom of the heap of the powerful Destroy decks, all the way down in Tier 3 this week. And Hela Discard finding itself remaining in that Tier 3 strategy as well. Last but not least, Lockjaw On Reveal kind of finds itself the inferior of the two Lockjaw decks right now, behind the Dracula version, and the inferior of the Reveal decks, thanks to Wong Reveal proving to be stronger as well, meaning while it is still a very valid choice, finds itself in Tier number 3 this week. If you're interested in any of the Tier 4 archetypes we've got on show here, including two brand new ones, the 2-power version of Cerebro and the hand-size Black Panther deck, you can find deck lists for those in the article down below, but we won't be covering them in the video this week. And of course, if you are joining us from earlier or late, I should say, you've joined us later in the game of Marvel Snap, you're looking for more budget choices and pool 2 friendly decks, we've got our offerings that we think are the best things you can be playing in pool number 2 to challenge the established list of metagame available on this tier list as well. And again, won't be covering those on video, but deck lists are available in the article in the description box down below. Alrighty, that's enough of that. Let's head on over into the client this week, hopefully show things up a little bit more, and walk you through each and every one of these top tier decks from Tier 1 to Tier 3, show you a deck list, and talk to you with what they are all about. So hopefully this works the way that it should. There we go, look at that, nice and shiny. We're over to Baero, of course, our top tier deck of the week to start things off. This one continues to just be a dominant force. It's kind of extremely difficult this week to separate all the Tier 1 decks when they come to like average power level or ceiling overall. They all look like they could compete for the title of best deck in the game and probably change position based on what you face or what the popular tech cards are right now. However, this week we've decided to go with Baero as the deck that is the most polished so far, with other archetypes still potentially having room to grow overall. Aero and Magneto seem perfect currently to disrupt the opponent's strategies like Wong and Lockjaw, and these two cards that are great stat sticks as well have very unique effects that don't hurt either. This deck doesn't get hurt, I should say, by the prevalence of Cosmo and Armor right now being in the metagame, because your Destroy package is very secondary to your overall game plan. Both of those cards would require you to hold your cards for when you want to blow them up rather than playing them out into Cosmo or Armor proactively, and Baero can do that by playing towards the mid game with those cards as opposing to having to establish them early. If you're not familiar with how this one plays, it can be split into two parts really. Setting up your late game, reaping the rewards of doing so. Early game built around two things. You're going to be trying to get ahead in locations where possible and getting 2 kills on cards so you can discount death by 2, allowing you to play her and another card on the turn that you wave. You have several efficient ways of doing this. Carnage plus Bucky Barnes, obviously incredibly efficient. Mysterio creates tokens you can clear up with Carnage or Deathlock as well. And the Hood and Nova being fine to kill with either Carnage, Killmonger or Deathlock, while also leaving some power behind. Once you've achieved this, you can slam Wave on turn number 5, setting up Death plus another card on turn number 6, and preventing the opponent from doing too much on their side. Then while Death represents represents our points to lock up the lane we play her into, we can use Magneto or Aero to pull opposing cards away from the other location that we're already ahead on. This means that, you know, alongside Death, your opponent's only going to be playing one more card, so hopefully all going to plan, Death should lock up a location by itself, and Aero or Magneto should drag cards away from the other location that you intend to win. Really powerful play lines, and if you're looking for a full guide to this deck, courtesy of our very own KM Best, it's available in the article down below for all those play patterns, card choices, more information. Go check out that guide. KM did a fantastic job at explaining how this deck, of I believe their origin, works, so well worth checking out. Okie dokie, up next, we're going to be looking at Lockjaw Dracula. Just making sure everything is appearing on screen the way that it should. Looks like we're all good. If this was Den's decision alone, this deck would be tier 0. He might even just write a tier list with just this deck on it, to be honest, because he is a hell of a discard fanboy. So if you've got problems with this deck being this high, go fight Den about it over on Twitter. I'm sure he will love having the conversation with you. We've been talking about this deck for like 3 weeks now, and it seems like the perfect build is still up in the air. There are versions with Hela, versions with Thor, versions with Odin being tested as we write this. Yet even being an unpolished deck, the Lockjaw Dracula deck is able to develop a ton of points. When you get Morbius on 2, Lockjaw on 3, Dracula on 4, you can easily expect to break the 60-point barrier without any additional location help. The deck's major limitation is in its inability to adapt, either to locations or to tech cards. This is a big bag of discard cards you want to abuse as much as humanly possible, and generating a ton of points in the process of doing so. You aren't really concerned with what your opponent's doing an awful lot of the time, and we aren't running many ways to counteract it as a result, except for like maybe Moon Knight in some variations to help discard cards. We'll see if counters to this deck arise, but for now, it's looking amazing and making discard a very relevant archetype again. If you aren't familiar with this deck, it's looking to use Lockjaw in order to maximize your discard effects. When we start going off, our hand is just going to melt away. This means it's important to find either Swarm or Apocalypse early, preferably before we start doing our thing, hence the inclusion of America Chavez in this deck to help find those cards more consistently. If we do, Swarm's going to give us some potential explosive plays when played behind Lockjaw later on, and Apocalypse grows to just stupid amounts of power, making Dracula able to win a lane all by itself. With Morbius, Lockjaw and Dracula in this deck, it's entirely possible to start discarding on turn 5 and no earlier, once the cards you don't want to lose are already on the board. This isn't much of a problem thanks to Swarm being able to fill Lockjaw's location really quickly and getting additional discards thanks to your deck flipping discard cards into play from those copies of Swarm. Very cool stuff, and honestly, one of my favourite decks to play right now as well. On to Ongoing Destroyer. This, as I kind of mentioned in the intro, a refreshing version of an established archetype that felt very solved going into this week, but turns out all it needed was a fresh pair of eyes and an entirely fresh take. It was a great deck before, but it was arguably missing a bit of power in order to compete with the other big performers. However, thanks to Owen Collier Ridge, I assume I'm getting that right, fingers crossed, it feels like the power problem has been solved as the deck takes a page from the Spectrum Ongoing deck. In this build, Destroyer simply is a big beater that can contest a location all by itself. The whole Destroy package was mostly cut from this in exchange for more ongoing cards, which doesn't feel so bad considering the amount of times that Nova, the Hood, or Bucky Barnes get met with a timely armor from your opponent these days. Since the deck plays armor and Cosmo itself, it can also really destroy the other Destroy decks in the process without suffering any setbacks itself. Another take on this deck has been to add Electro to it, alongside more 5-cost cards like Iron Man, which is a take we saw in several versions of the deck this week. This is arguably much greedier, but opens the possibility to play both Destroyer and Spectrum in the same game, which is a very interesting power play to make. If you aren't familiar with this one, it aims to fill the board with ongoing cards while trying to limit what the opponent is able to do in the process. Kind of split this into two parts is the best way of thinking of it: proactive ongoing effects, reactive effects. In the proactive category we find Ant-Man, Colossus, Lizard, Captain America, Mr. Fantastic and Warpath. These cards should be your main source of points during the first part of the game. Keep in mind, because you are running Warpath, you really don't want to expand onto 3 locations if you can help it. As for the reactive ones, Armor, Cosmo, Professor X, they kind of fill those roles. These three allow you to set up a good Destroyer and protect Lizard, while annoying Destroyer on Reveal decks based on the cards you're playing out. Also, because Spectrum can buff them on turn 6, they can actually contribute to your overall point score exceptionally nicely. If you're looking for a detailed origin story about this deck and a bit of a guide overall, written by Owen himself, who put it together, it's linked in the article down below. You can go check it out and find out more all about this upcoming version of Destroyer really easily. We'll go on to Wong Reveal here, another deck that's honestly making a brand new shiny name for itself off the back of new cards. We weren't really a believer in Black Panther to start with, to be honest, but based on how well On Reveal is doing, we were wrong. Arnim Zola has to make the cut now, combining it with Black Panther to create 32 points on turn 6 across 2 locations. It's just an exceptionally strong play, and sometimes alongside Wong, things go really crazy and you can score up to 64 points on that final turn thanks to that 3-card combination. As a result, similar to the Lockjaw Dracula deck, On Reveal seems to be among the highest point scorers in the game. Yet with Iceman and Storm included into the deck, it can afford to be a little bit more annoying than the other discard deck and maybe have a bit more counterplay to what the opponent is trying to do. If you're not familiar with this one, for the most part, the reason we've ranked it lower is Cosmo. Cosmo completely ruins your day with this deck, so it feels a little bit less reliable overall, and you definitely retreat more often than some of the other tier 1 decks. It's mostly looking to abuse Wong and Odin in this kind of known On Reveal shell. It really separates the first 3 and the last 3 turns of the game. Once Wong is in play, you just have a completely different power level than if you don't draw Wong in your game. Your best sequences tend to involve Wong on 4, a 5-cost card on turn 5, be that White Tiger or Black Panther, and then a 6 behind that, usually Arnim Zola or Odin, but Dr. Doom works just fine as well. Most of the time, Panther really wants to be paired with Zola, and White Tiger really wants to be paired with Odin, and Dr. Doom is very much the fit-in-anywhere kind of card that contributes no matter what happens. Ironheart plus Wolfsbane also represent a really nice turn 6 in absence of another turn 6 play, if they're played together, especially alongside Wong. Gives you plenty of redundancy in that department. The first 3 turns are super flexible. Ebony Maw tends to be mostly played, I should say, to gain priority and just kind of pressure a location, which gives you at least a turn to abuse Wong in the event of things like Cosmo or Enchantress. Iceman just annoys the opponent early where possible. Psylocke allows you to skip directly to Wong on turn 3. She also opens up a 3-cost plus Ebony Maw on turn 3. Or allows you to play 2 5 or 6 cost cards in a row if you don't find Wong by playing it on turn 3 as well. Storm is just a location lock in this deck, which we can easily access later on thanks to cards like White Tiger or Dr. Doom, which makes it a fantastic inclusion in this deck as well. Our last Tier 1 deck of the week is going to be Sera Miracle. This version featured a little bit more destroy heavy than perhaps some of the ones you've seen in the past. Still one of the best decks in the game, but definitely being challenged by a few other contenders this time around. Sera Miracle is still arguably the most flexible deck in the game in our book. You can build it around Dracula, you can build it around Strong Guy, you can build it around Ongoing, or Destroy. In that sense, the deck is highly capable of adapting to any metagame, which is what makes it remain a top-tier choice. But with other high scorers emerging, such as Black Panther and Discard, it seems like Sera Miracle simply doesn't get away with as many wins on turn 6 as it used to. If you're somehow not familiar with this one, the play pattern is very simple. You're looking to capitalize on Sera's ability on turn number 5, to give a spectacular turn number 6. There are many cards you can play before Sera if you have nothing to do, things like Bishop and Angela, but they're actually just fantastic on turn 6 as well. This way, you can spread your points efficiently and evenly across as many locations as possible, surprising your opponent, stealing a ton of cubes, and gathering a ton of information in the process. We've got a very detailed guide for this one available on the site as well. Once again, description box, check out the article, go grab the guide, and try this one out for yourself. Moving down to tier number 2, we start with a fan favourite and arguably the most competitive budget deck Marvel Snap has to offer in Kazoo, this more disruptive version that you get to start playing once you start reaching Pool 2 and Pool 3. In the early days of a season, Kazoo simply does everything you could ask of it to do. It's stable, it's adaptable, and it's capable of snapping quite early in the game to scare the opponent or just raise the stakes when you draw very, very well. Now that it includes both armor and Cosmo as well as anti-meta choices, the deck could consider making the switch to being more ongoing focused and trying to abuse Spectrum and Ebony more. But even without going this far, it seems like Kazoo has kind of solved its Killmonger problem, which immediately allows it to be another major part of the metagame once again. It's just a textbook proactive deck looking to develop points and make smart use of energy every single turn. For the first 3 turns, you're pretty flexible. Turn 4 is normally spent regimentedly on Kazaa, and then turn 5 on either Blue Marvel or Iron Man. Turn 6 can actually be quite flexible as well with this one. You can push a location with many small cards, or just look to jam America Chavez if you've got enough points spread across the board already. Excuse me. Compared to previous iterations of this deck, the current build includes Armor and Cosmo to protect its very important 1-cost units from Killmonger, while also being fantastic anti-meta choices in the current metagame. Ideally, you want to play Armor on a location where you also intend on playing Ant-Man and another 1-cost card, usually Iceman or Nightcrawler, or where you intend to move Nightcrawler into, possibly. Cosmo's more flexible to play, either on our big ongoing card locations, or to protect ourselves from Enchantress where possible, or just as a disruptive tool against these On Reveal and Destroy decks, if we anticipate our opponent is going to be playing big effects on a certain location. Up next in Tier 2 this week, I should say, Control. More traditional Control, making a little bit of a return to form. The optimal build of the Control archetype definitely still incredibly difficult to figure out and not resolved in any way whatsoever. There are so many cards you can play in this deck. Things like Magic, Sera, Dr. Octopus, Armor, Cosmo, Green Goblin, just to name a few that you do not see in the version on screen right now. And secondly, with new archetypes rising at the start of a season, it's really hard to kind of target what you're supposed to be trying to counter from them if you're playing the Control archetype. Nevertheless, Enchantress, Shang-Chi, very solid duo right now. Rescue can help you develop way more points early on than your opponent, so this seems to be a nice middle-of-the-pack archetype at the second. This has less reactive cards than normal, although Cosmo and Dr. Octopus could definitely make the cut in this deck as well. The deck really wants to develop some points before switching on its reactive game plan. Being able to get ahead at least one location early makes it way easier to be reactive later on. Through Angela and the Destroy cards you see here, we're able to contest at least one location quite easily. To win the second one, we can often rely on our flexible cards, things like Captain Marvel or Doctor Doom, or simply wait for our opponent to commit with like a Devil Dinosaur or something like that, and then punish them with Enchantress or Shang-Chi. We move on to our next option here, Deathpool, making its way down just a little bit this week. Still a great deck, but suffering a bit too much from the popular inclusions of Armor and Cosmo, which kind of both massively limit the synergies in this deck, truth be told. It simply seems like this isn't a great time for Deathpool. It might find a way to counter these cards, much like Kazoo has, so we look forward to seeing how it evolves in the coming weeks. The deck is very much based around trying to destroy Deadpool as many times as you possibly can to grow its power over and over, reducing Death's cost in the process. Then you can copy Deadpool's power with a card like Taskmaster, or play it alongside Death thanks to something like Wave. This deck has nice upsides of naturally playing around most board disruption effects like Goblins or Rocks, because you have so many ways of clearing them out with Carnage, Venom, and Killmonger. Outside of the key cards, the rest of the deck is solely cards that either help Deadpool grow, things like Carnage, Venom, and Hulkbuster, or things that benefit from being destroyed themselves, like Bucky Barnes, Nova, and the Hood. Easily the most flexible card in a deck like this is Venom. If you don't have it, don't panic too much. It's very much just another destroy tool overall, or can be a big target for Taskmaster in a pinch as a backup to Deadpool or Death when they're not available for you. Up next, Patriot, another fan favourite archetype that is still holding its own week on week. The problem being for this deck that Enchantress is very, very annoying for Patriot. Cosmo can also sometimes ruin your mystique and your whole game plan in the process. Patriot is still performing quite nicely, and definitely a few versions of this deck being featured that include Invisible Woman to try and hide Patriot from your opponent and those hate cards for as long as possible. Several players reaching Infinite using this archetype already this week, such as Shady Soul, which we featured in our Infinite Decks of the Week series this week, so you can go check that one out. There's a video version of that that too if you prefer to ingest content that way. The deck very much revolves around making the most of our payoff cards, which buff our entire board, those being Kazoo and Blue Marvel. They serve as decent Patriot replacements if we don't find it, and Patriot themselves should be the go-to option where available. Supporting these abilities, we have Onslaught and Mystique in order to duplicate them up and make more copies of them, and in some versions, cards like Magic and Adam Warlock see play as well, to either give you extra turns or let you draw more cards to find your big payoffs. The rest of the deck is definitely composed of cheap recipients for your buffs. You should be using them to fill 2 locations before you focus on your combo in the final couple turns. You know, in the last few turns, you need one of those payoff cards in Blue Marvel, Onslaught, Patriot, Mystique. But Ultron does offer you another option that lets you fill 2 locations in a pinch, meaning you can play out Patriot and your other buffs more proactively during the early game. On to Sera Negative, another one we've actually covered quite a bit this week with a budget version on the YouTube channel as well. The play rate of this deck has dropped quite a lot given that new archetypes are emerging and people are trying out new, cool, shiny things. This could be one of the last weeks that Negative Serotonin is featured on the tier list. We'll have to wait and see. The deck still has a very nice high roll potential, leading to a ton of points, surprising many opponents in the process. With Discard and Black Panther on Reveal being popular currently, it just feels like there are more reliable options to gain that type of ridiculous endgame swing this deck was once iconic for doing. The deck focuses a lot on being played over large sample sizes and maximizing its great hands and folding the bad ones. As such, you snap very aggressively with Sera Negative more often than not if your hand contains one of the big payoffs, cards like Mr. Negative or Sera being those cards. The one thing to consider regarding Mr. Negative is the amount of low power cards you've already drawn by turn 4. It might not be worth snapping if you have already drawn things like Iron Man already, Mystique, Rogue, Wolfsbane already stuck up in your hand. It's harder to get as much a benefit from Mr. Negative. In those spots, you do become a bit of a Sera-only deck, and that's going to lower your overall point ceiling, but with Angela, Bishop, Mojo, and other high scorers, you can definitely still compete on that final turn if you do draw those chunkers a bit too early. We'll move down to pool number 3 and look at some of the more exciting decks down here. Location Lock, or Lockation if you prefer. The other take on controlling the opponent right now, arguably a little teeny bit worse. But limiting your opponent's ability to play has gained momentum overall. Through reducing the playing field, this deck makes Cosmo and Armor very reliable against the decks they counter. The reason this deck isn't ranked as highly as the Enchantress Shang-Chi core is that On Reveal is just super popular right now, and doesn't have any trouble playing into any location, even if you use Storm or Spider-Man, making cards like Shang-Chi better anti-meta tools right now. If you're not familiar with this one, you know, there might be a case for playing Green Goblin or Debris again in a deck like this, maybe playing something like Daredevil over Lizard to make better use of Professor X and Hobgoblin, but the goal here is to limit the playing field for your opponent, which makes it pretty easy for you to guess their next step. Cards like Storm, Spider-Man, Hobgoblin, Professor X, you're going to be able to reduce the game to 1 or 2 locations, which will make Armor and Cosmo significantly more annoying. We're also looking to score high points with cards like Ebony Maw, Lizard, and Jessica Jones. You know, give ourselves a much higher chance of winning a location almost by themselves. We can also use Nightcrawler and Doctor Doom to support those cards, as they give us the ability to impact our already unplayable locations. Really interesting to see Movement making its way up into Tier 3 this week. A Tier 4 deck for the larger part of most of our previous seasons. Move seems like it might be on its way back up. You know, a little bit of movement. Please don't fire me. I'm sorry. It's been posting better results than it's seen in the past, so we've ranked it as a Tier 3 as a precaution this week, considering these results are quite new, but it could definitely move up or down again next week based on whether that solid performance is stabilised. The change in this build now includes cards like Polaris, Aero, and Magneto. It probably has a lot more to do with it than you'd think. These cards enable the deck to disrupt the opponent rather than just trying to be proactive and develop as many points as possible. Also, these cards allow the deck to set up much better situations for Dagger, or grow Craven with your opponent's cards and not just your own. We really wouldn't be surprised to see this one evolving in time. This very different take on move could be the start of a brand new archetype, truth be told. In this iteration, Human Torch, Dagger, Vulture and Craven are definitely the cards you're looking to grow. Human Torch and Vulture just want to move as much as you possibly can, as they can grow to ridiculous point totals. Things like Iron Fist, Cloak, Doctor Strange or Heimdall should always be valuable cards as long as they're paired with one of these two. Dagger and Craven require a little bit more finesse and seem to be a bit more situational, yet thanks to these newly introduced cards like Polaris and Baero, we're able to set them up way more efficiently. Lastly, and this feels like the biggest improvement compared to other move builds, we have more ways of developing some just raw amounts of points. Miles Morales, Baero and Magneto are just all really big cards, and they contribute to any location very, very nicely. So do keep your eyes on this one, making its way up this week. Zero Destroy, unfortunately, arguably the weakest version of Destroy at the moment. The downfall started towards the end of last season, and it hasn't really stopped. Although Enchantress is fantastic against Wong and On Reveal, it feels like Zero doesn't develop enough points consistently to challenge the top archetypes right now. Also, with Baero being popular, this deck can end up with several big point scorers stuck at the same location, leading to barely anything on the other two. Building around negating the abilities of Typhoid Mary and Red Skull here, we're mixing together several synergies. The big ones are going to be destroying our cards with things like Carnage and Venom, and the ability to remove the negative impact of cards like Typhoid Mary and Red Skull via Zero and Enchantress. The last card included to kind of get points without the downside is, of Red Skull normally is Taskmaster, and this can often be paired with things like Arnim Zola in other versions of the deck. As a result, the deck plays pretty similarly to Destroy for the first few turns overall, eating up Nova, Bucky Barnes, Sabretooth, Mysterio clones, all these kind of things. And then once we get to the late game, we should be planning around our big point scorers and looking for play patterns to let us maximize them as best as possible. Zero needs to be played before Typhoid Mary and Red Skull, but things like Enchantress, Venom and Taskmaster can come afterwards, meaning that your turn 6 can often be quite surprising for your opponent all around. On to Lockjaw On Reveal down in Tier 3 this week. This deck does still exist, but it seems to have lost a lot of popularity to the On Reveal Wong deck or the Discard Lockjaw deck, kind of providing the worst of both worlds, arguably. Those other decks have been evolving this season. Lockjaw On Reveal doesn't really seem to have been evolving in the same way. Whether new cards will appear in this deck, very much whether or not time will tell as we move forward into the next few weeks, but not really evolving so far. And we're hoping it's not the beginning of the end for Lockjaw as its own deck, but time will tell. Plan A for this deck is super straightforward. You're going to be looking to abuse Lockjaw with cheap cards in order to chuck out your bigger ones for the most part. Simple stuff. Plan B is to abuse the On Reveal synergies to try and compete even if you don't draw Lockjaw. Through Thor, Jubilee, White Tiger, Odin, it's still possible to put a decent amount of points on a board while playing on curve, and will give you a fighting chance instead of having to immediately retreat when you don't draw Lockjaw. The deck is definitely weaker when this happens, but having those play patterns is definitely a nice backup plan. Last but not least, in tier number 3 this week, Hela Discard. With Cosmo being really popular, Hela can get shut down if the Space Dog is played on your Invisible Woman lane on turn 5 or turn 6. That's a very dangerous play pattern, leading to it falling down the tier list a little bit this week. That being said, the deck is still possibly the most explosive deck in the game, and the ability to surprise your opponent is just kind of unrivaled with this one. Points-wise, Hela might be one of the few older archetypes that can still compete with things like Black Panther. The deck's problem is being way more unreliable than those decks, leading to more retreats and more unfortunate losses. We've seen people kind of advocating for safer builds of Hela, but then it would just make more sense to run Dracula Lockjaw in our opinion, which is the more reliable discard deck currently. The deck very much revolves around Invisible Woman to safely play our discard effects and then play Hela at the same location as her. At the end of the game, these will all trigger in the order they were played and summon every single fatty you discarded. If we don't draw into Invisible Woman, you can just play for points on turn 3, 4, and 5, and 6, possibly, with these big statted minions. Or risk it and hope that you don't discard Hela if it's already stuck in your hand. Jubilee has been a consideration in this build in the past as a result over things like Captain Marvel, providing another turn 4 play. Red Skull has also been included in the past as well, as have cards like Magneto here, providing you a second 5-cost play if Captain Marvel isn't enough in your opinion, and kind of replacing the vanilla stat body of Hulk. The start of a new season is just such an exciting time, but also a very difficult one to read a metagame clearly. We see posts about reaching infinite with various decks on a daily basis, and everyone has a pile of different opinions about what is good and what isn't. Some tech cards completely change matchups, tilting your opinion towards one deck or the other, and even excellent platforms like SnapFan see their data constantly evolving. The sample size of decks is just not big enough yet to make a concrete conclusion. As a result, we encourage you to advise you, I should say, maybe, to view this tier list with an open mind, as it very well could change quite a lot before we write the next one in just a week's time. Nevertheless, we're super excited about the direction the metagame is currently taking, and seeing Discard and Move back in the discussion as viable strategies is a great sign for Snap and a great sign for overall power balance. What do you think about this metagame right now? Do let us know either in the comments section down below, possibly in the article if you'd like, or come and talk to us in our community Discord server with over 2,500 members, and let us know what you're thinking about all things Snap right now. Last but not least, maybe just go and tag us on Twitter if you like at Marvel Snap Zone. We'll be more than happy to talk to you about it there as well. This week has felt incredibly fresh, and we've had a ton of fun climbing and getting ourselves up higher ranks this week. And we look forward to hearing about your similar stories in the very near future. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel here on YouTube. I want to keep making these for you, and that little support that costs you nothing goes a long way in letting me do exactly that. Until next time, I have been HowlingMines, you have been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.